Hello, gathered friends, I'm Haror Nuva, and welcome to Bionicle Deep Dive, where we analyze the tropes, characters, and lore of LEGO Bionicle. Today, I wanted to go through an investigation I've done recently into a theory I've had for a while now. That in Transformers, the concept of Optimus Prime and Megatron having once been friends, and therefore the beloved Transformers 1 movie that came out last year, traces its origins back to Bionicle. I'm going to lay out all the evidence I found for my theory, as well as all the evidence I found against it, and do my best to come to a conclusion. Let's dive right into it. So, on this day last year, the movie Transformers 1 came out, and personally, I think it was one of, if not the best Transformers stories I've ever seen. And I know there's other people who agree with me. The movie depicts the origins of Optimus Prime and Megatron, the leaders of the two warring factions of Transformers. It was an extremely well-animated, well-written exploration of how these two iconic characters came to become who we know them to be. Transformers 1 is one of the most in-depth depictions of an aspect of their relationship that is often alluded to in modern Transformers media. That before they were enemies, Optimus Prime and Megatron had once been good friends, almost like brothers. And for a while now, I've believed, with some good reason, that this interpretation of their dynamic may have been inspired by Bionicle. Maybe. Hear me out. Okay, so I'll lay it out here quick and justify each point in detail later on. I believe Transformers 1's depiction of Optimus Prime and Megatron being former friends was inspired by a similar plotline in the Transformers Prime TV show. Transformers Prime's take on their relationship was inspired by the live-action Michael Bay movies where Optimus Prime and Megatron allude to having been brothers once. And I think it's possible that this line of them being brothers may have been inspired by Bionicle, based on similar concepts explored in Bionicle, context clues, and certain aspects of the timing. So, Transformers as a franchise has many different continuities and different interpretations of the characters and lore, with new stories often taking inspiration from older ones and spinning them in their own way. The earliest depictions of Transformers don't seem to feature Optimus and Megatron having a deep personal connection before the war. Rather, the two are enemies because they are the leaders of the two warring sides, and their rivalry simply emerged from that. There's some early depictions of the Optimus-Megatron pre-war relationship include the Marvel Comics, where they were rival gladiators, and in the G1 cartoon where Orion Pax, Optimus' persona before he became a Prime, was a dock worker who naively let Megatron into a storage area before Megatron betrayed and shot him. But more recent incarnations play with the idea that their relationship is much deeper and more personal. Now, full disclaimer, I am not an expert on Transformers lore, at least not the way I am with Bionicle. I enjoy the franchise and have a general knowledge of the world and characters, but there are some stories that I haven't watched or read. Much of the research for this theory came from me combing through the Transformers wiki as carefully as I could, as well as from the channel of Chris McFeely, who does an excellent job of lore recaps on his series Transformers: The Basics. I did my best to examine all the earliest depictions of the relationship between Optimus and Megatron in as many continuities as I could find, in order to pinpoint when the concept of them being friends turned enemies originated. And as best as I could find, the earliest version of this came from the live-action movies, with a clear line of inspiration to Transformers 1 from those movies. So, Transformers 1 shows that before they were Optimus Prime and Megatron, Orion Pax and D-16 were close friends who discovered the corruption in Cybertron society, and in trying to oppose it, went down different paths that led them to becoming mortal enemies. This depiction clearly drew heavy inspiration from their relationship in Transformers Prime, in which the two were allies and correspondents in their political criticism of the status quo on Cybertron. When Orion was chosen over Megatron to lead, Megatron waged war. I'm confident in saying that one was inspired by Prime, given the many similarities between the two stories of Optimus and Megatron's origins. In both stories, the two were strongly critical of the political corruption and elitism on Cybertron, with Megatron advocating for violent takeover and inspiring the earliest Decepticons with his projection of strength. In both, Megatron idolized Megatronus Prime and took his name after him. And in both, Orion Pax was drawn to the core of Cybertron and given the matrix of leadership by Primus himself, transforming him into Optimus, the first new Prime in a generation. Transformers Prime, in turn, took heavy inspiration from the live-action Transformers movies. The screenwriters of the first two live-action movies, Alex Kurtzman and Roberto Orci, were the creators of the series. The inspiration is also clear in the designs, particularly of Optimus, Bumblebee, and Megatron. The decision to cast Peter Cullen as Optimus and having Bumblebee be mute and only able to communicate through his radio. And most importantly, the live-action movies also allude to, but never really explore, the idea that Optimus Prime and Megatron were close allies. Specifically, that they were brothers. At the end of the first movie, after Megatron is killed, Optimus remarks sadly, "You left me no choice, brother." And in the fifth movie, The Last Night, Megatron, who has been resurrected, tries to convince Optimus to join him during their battle, saying, "We were brothers once," to which Optimus replies, "Once," and continues fighting. Comics set in the live-action continuity, published several years after the first movie, expand on this by showing that they were brothers in arms and students of Sentinel Prime before becoming co-rulers of Cybertron. Eventually, a rift formed between them over Sentinel's preference for Optimus, and Optimus being given the Matrix of Leadership, leading to a war over the Allspark. And I believe that the 2007 Transformers movie may have taken some inspiration from Bionicle, and in particular, the brother line might have been one of them. And I will admit, this is by far the biggest reach in my theory. The other steps are pretty straightforward. There's a very clear line of inspiration from the live-action movie's brother line to the story of Transformers 1. But claiming inspiration between two different franchises is a much harder sell. And I will admit outright, I have no definitive proof, in this case would be something like an interview where someone who worked on Transformers says they took inspiration from Bionicle. I don't have any of that. So take everything with a grain of salt. But what I do have are several pieces of circumstantial evidence that at least puts us in the realm of possibility. The first is simply the initial line itself. As a Bionicle fan, this line immediately stood out to me when I first saw it in the movie in theaters. There was something about the delivery of the word brother that felt so similar to the way the term was used in Bionicle. In Bionicle, there are many instances of characters referring to each other as brothers, not in a literal biological family sense, but in a more spiritual sense. They had a deep connection and shared origin that made them like brothers. It particularly read similar to the way the term brother was used between Matanui and Makuta in Bionicle, who were the respective big good and big bad robots from that series, in a similar way Optimus Prime and Megatron were to theirs. This dynamic also is very similar to Likon and Nidiki from the second Bionicle movie. Nidiki, a monstrous insectoid-looking villain, calls Likon brother, to which Likon responds, "You lost the right to call me brother long ago." This is a very close parallel, not only in theme but also in presentation. As in Bionicle 2, this line is never expanded upon in the movie itself, just like Optimus's line isn't expanded on in its movie. But in both cases, they efficiently allude to two enemies having a mysterious past relationship as brothers. Also notable, earlier in their fight scene in the movie, Optimus says, "It's just you and me, Megatron," to which Megatron replies, "No, it's just me, Prime," which is a very similar phrasing to an exchange in the Bionicle comics, where Kopaka says, "That leaves you and I, Tahu Nuva," and Tahu replies, "No, that only leaves me." I can't say I've ever seen that specific dialogue phrasing anywhere else, though I wouldn't be surprised if this was a common phrasing, but I just haven't seen it, so it's possible that this was a line inspired by Bionicle. Another potential hint towards Transformers 2007 taking inspiration from Bionicle comes from the designs of the characters. The Transformers design broke from the traditional look of the Cybertronians had in most media before this, skewing the blocky, clearly robotic look of the toys for a much more organic look, with lots more moving small pieces to make them look more creature-like. It was even stated that the goal for their redesigns was to emphasize their alien nature more than their robotic nature, which definitely came across. Meanwhile, Bionicle's movies from a few years earlier had a very similar design philosophy. The characters were changed away from the toys to look far more organic and fleshed out, with lots of little pieces and details. This gave them a far more real and grounded look, as if they were a real species. I would even argue that the look of the live-action Transformers resembles the look of the Toa and Matoran in the Bionicle movies. The mouths and faces are especially similar. The shaping of the details underneath the armor is similar. This was something that was noted at the time the Transformers movies came out. Particularly the design of the Fallen in the second movie was heavily compared to a Bionicle. I also think that Megatron's head shape bears at least some resemblance to the toy version of Makuda's Mask of Shadows. And while deep growly voices are a common staple of monstrous movie villains, to my ears there is a resemblance between Hugo Weaving's portrayal of Megatron's voice and Lee Talker's portrayal of Makuda's voice in Mask of Light. Now, there's also a piece of evidence that's a bit weird and inexplicable, which is this image, which appears to show the silhouette of the 2007 movie design of Megatron, surrounded by Visorak in the Sundial room from Bionicle 3, Web of Shadows. This image is filed under the concept art page on Biomedia Project, and even they are openly unsure of what it means. According to the page, this image was found on the homepage of Michael Rose, who worked with Creative Capers as art director on Bionicle 2 and 3. Bionicle 3 came out in 2005, while this design of Megatron was not officially released until the 2007 movie. There are a couple possible explanations for this discrepancy, one of which may be evidence for a degree of production collaboration between the Bionicle movies and the Transformers movies, though nothing is certain. Perhaps he somehow was given access to Megatron's character model back in 2004, when Bionicle 3 would have been in production, and used it for concept art. It's technically possible since Transformers began its earliest pre-production stages in 2003, but frankly, there's no explanation for how this image came to be that really makes sense. If this really was concept art for Bionicle 3, then how did Rose get access to Megatron's character model when he isn't credited as working on Transformers? It's known that Megatron went through several redesigns over the years before the movie came out, and while it is difficult to determine exactly which version of Megatron this is because of the shadows, it looks slightly more like the final version than the preliminary version that was leaked. It appears to use Megatron's silhouette as a placeholder for Makuda, perhaps, but why wouldn't he just use the existing Makuda character model? Other concept art of Bionicle 3 includes what looked like Makuda's video game model. It's also possible that this was made way later, after Transformers 2007 came out, which would explain how he had access to the design, but if so, that still doesn't explain why he would use Megatron for a Bionicle scene to show off his work. Truly, this is a mystery. In other minor possible production connections, on the Creative Capers website, they list one of their clients as HASBRO, the company that owns Transformers. Though I have not been able to find specifics on which projects they worked on for HASBRO or when. It might not have been anything Transformers related, we don't know. But if Creative Capers did work with HASBRO during the time of the first Bayverse Transformers movie, this might explain why Michael Rose could have access to the Megatron model? I don't know. But more importantly, I feel like the context of the time period when the Transformers movies and the Bionicle movies came out, and the situation between the two toy franchises, does add some plausibility to this theory. Bionicle and Transformers, owned by LEGO and HASBRO respectively, were direct competitors in the toy market. They appealed to basically the same demographic, young boys who like robot action figures with extensive lore. Not only that, but the time period where the Transformers movie was being developed, 2003 to 2007, was right after Bionicle had hit its peak in popularity. I think sometimes we forget that at its peak, Bionicle was a worldwide phenomena. It saved LEGO from bankruptcy as its sole profit generator for a couple of years, allowing them to recover and eventually become the biggest toy company in the world. Bionicle's DC comic book run was, at one time, the most circulated comic book in the world. It's also notable that that same time was a period where Transformers was in a bit of a doldrums according to some fans, with the movies really revitalizing the franchise and the fandom. So given that context, it would not be unthinkable that Transformers would have taken at least some inspiration from what well may have been their strongest competitor at the time. Competitors take cues from each other all the time across all industries. Take what worked for them and spin it your own way. So if Bionicle found success by making their long-feuding big good and big bad robots be brothers in spirit, perhaps it would work for Optimus and Megatron. And it did. And, while we're talking about Transformers potentially taking inspiration from Bionicle, I feel like it's only fair to say that Bionicle certainly took inspiration from Transformers. As, Transformers was the older franchise in the niche they both occupied. It's very likely Bionicle came to be because it followed in the thematic footsteps of Transformers, which, really showed that toy robots with rich characters and world building could be massively successful. Who would have guessed? In both franchises, they're unique because the robot characters are treated as fully human in spirit, with the narratives never truly questioning their personhood. From a toy perspective, there was also some inspiration in the fact that, while they didn't fully shapeshift like the Transformers do, many of the Toa had alternate modes where they could reconfigure their weapons into modes of transportation. This dual mode of fighting and vehicles was likely taking a page from Transformers' book. It's a pretty good success. And as far as thematic and story parallels, well, we have tons of them. The first Transformers movie from the 80s was about a young, impulsive Autobot named Hot Rod taking responsibility and rising to the role of hero as Rodimus Prime, a role he realized by activating a powerful, light-themed artifact that was prophesied to be wielded by a chosen one. To my Bionicle fans, I am sure that sounded very familiar, since it is the same core story of Takua becoming Takanuva with the Mask of Light. Not a crazy stretch to ask if there wasn't some inspiration there. And of course, perhaps the biggest parallel, and biggest spoiler for Bionicle at least, skip ahead if you're a Transformers fan and you want to preserve the mystery, is that both had their major robot god figure be literally the world they live on. Primus, the god of the Transformers, was the planet of Cybertron, and could even transform from planet mode to robot mode. While Matanui, the great spirit of Bionicle, was also a huge planet-sized robot, and the characters lived inside him acting as his cells. Hence, why Bionicle is the biological chronicle. And while the origins of the idea of Matanui are well documented, it came from Bionicle co-creator Christian Faber, imagining the medicine he was taking for a tumor he had were capsules containing tiny warriors that would fight the disease in his body. It's possible that there was also at least some inspiration from Primus and Unicron in Transformers. And even if the initial inspiration was independent, it's possible that LEGO saw the idea as doing something similar that Transformers did, and figured they could capitalize on similar success. Alright, but let's get back to the theory. So, as best as I could tell through my research, Transformers 2007 was the very first to interpret Optimus Prime and Megatron's relationship as brothers, which added a lot of strength to my theory. While I still couldn't claim definitive proof, I couldn't find any other definite possible sources of them once being friends. Until I came across this. The Transformers Robots in Disguise cartoon from 2001. Notable for being the first Japanese original Transformers series to be officially broadcast in the US. In this continuity, Optimus Prime was created alongside his brother Ultra Magnus by Alpha Trion. However, their relationship was soured by Optimus being chosen to bear the matrix of leadership. This caused Ultra Magnus to become a bitter rival against Optimus, though they were still on the same side against the Decepticons. This ended up being a massive blow to my theory. This story closely follows many of the main plot points of the previous ones about Optimus and a former brother figure. The two were close when they were younger, but there was a massive rift related to how they chose to lead, culminating in Optimus being chosen for the matrix of leadership. This could very well be the origin for this interpretation of Optimus Prime and Megatron's relationship, with Megatron being substituted for Ultra Magnus. I'd say it's almost certainly the inspiration for the comics based on the live-action continuity, since their stories are nearly beat for beat. There is some ambiguity as to whether this was the intention in the actual 2007 movie, since the comics were published 4 years later, in 2011. It is very possible that the writers for the 2007 movie didn't have a fleshed out plan for Optimus and Megatron being brothers, as writers will often make up dangling plot threads or mysteries without a definitive answer, and then let the answer come to them later. But either way, we do have a possible other origin for the concept of Optimus Prime and Megatron being brothers, one that has at least a smidge more plausibility as a source of inspiration than Bionicle. So that seemed like it. Literally 1 week from my planned release date for this video, I thought I was all wrapped up in the research for it, just polishing up the script. I thought I had some mild evidence at best, no proof, but enough circumstantial stuff to make pleasant speculation. But then, I absentmindedly decided to double check a source I found, and it blew this whole case wide open, where I felt like a conspiracy theorist on the trail of something big. Henry Gilroy, one of the main writers for the Bionicle movies, also famous for being one of the main writers for Star Wars The Clone Wars 3D animated series, also spent a significant amount of time writing for Hasbro, and even wrote some episodes of Transformers Animated. This was it, a possible real connection between the two franchises. But did it actually line up? Did Gilroy work on Transformers early enough for there to have been any influence on the live-action movie? What drives me so insane about this is the timelines make it just barely possible, but still unlikely. I feel like I've got two extension cords that are less than an inch apart from meeting. Gilroy didn't work on the Transformers movie in any official capacity. Gilroy is credited as writing 2 Transformers animated episodes, one from Season 1 in early 2008, and another for Season 3. He was clearly not one of the primary writers for the series, just a freelancer who was working some episodes. He does heavier work on Hasbro projects later on. After his work on the Clone Wars, he led writing on G.I. Joe Renegades and Kaijudo in 2010 and 2012 respectively. But this is far too late. Then I got thinking, maybe there was a sliver of possibility. Animation timelines are very long. While there's a lot of variation, it's generally accepted that an animated TV episode takes about 9 months to a year to produce from start to finish. It should also be noted that often animated series complete the entire season before putting it on air, and Season 1 of Transformers Animated premiered in December 2007, 5 months after the premiere of the live-action movies. Now, movies sometimes finish production within a month or two of the premiere, rarely even right up to the premiere. This gives us about a 3-month window where Gilroy could have been writing for Transformers Animated before Transformers 2007 may have finished post-production. And notably, Optimus' brother line is said when his back is to the audience, meaning it would be very easy to add the voiceover late in production. So yes, it is technically just barely possible for Henry Gilroy to have been writing for Transformers in time for that line to have been added to the Michael Bay movie. But I have to be honest, I don't think this is likely. I do not think that Henry Gilroy directly contributed to the 2007 movie, or that it was him that added the idea that Optimus and Prime and Megatron were brothers. The evidence just isn't strong, and it's too big of a stretch of the imagination for a writer of one episode of a Transformers show to come in and add a line of massive significance during the final weeks of production for a major blockbuster movie. But his inclusion as a writer for Transformers Animated and other Hasbro projects later on does lend at least some strength for a subtler possibility. One that we mentioned earlier, that the other writers at Hasbro may have been at least partially interested in the ideas coming from Bionicle and took inspiration from that. What I mean is, prior to co-writing Star Wars The Clone Wars, which has since become his biggest claim to fame, the Bionicle trilogy was among the biggest projects he had a leading role writing in. So it is possible that Hasbro saw the Bionicle writer wanted to have his ideas for their stories since they were successful for LEGO. Though, even though this might be wishful thinking on my part. I mean, we can't ignore that even aside from Bionicle, Henry Gilroy had a very storied career. The man was truly a prolific writer for animation, working on projects all the way from the 90s to the 2020s. Okay. So, I've given a lot of points and evidence pointing in either direction. So let me do a summary, and then I'll give you my conclusion. The concept of Optimus Prime and Megatron having once considered each other brothers originally appeared in the 2007 live-action movie as a single line. This concept would later be expanded upon in later stories, until we got to perhaps the best depiction of this concept in the form of Transformers 1 last year. So the main mystery is where the live-action movie got this concept. In 2001, Transformers Robots in Disguise featured Optimus Prime and Ultra Magnus as brothers turned rivals over Optimus being chosen to lead. This plotline appears in basically every story in which Optimus Prime and Megatron are former friends, meaning it is likely the primary inspiration for this concept, and that it probably was not inspired solely or directly from Bionicle. However, there is still some evidence that Bionicle may have had at least some influence on the live-action movie, considering the design and philosophies of the Cybertronians in the movie and the Bionicle characters in their movie, the similarity in dialogue between certain scenes, and, while technically not evidence, given the context of when the movie came out, it is simply logical for Transformers to want to take at least some inspiration from Bionicle, given that they were their strongest competitors. And there's also the weird concept art of Megatron, though I don't know what to make of that. Now, some of the evidence I thought I had didn't work out as much as I had hoped, particularly Henry Gilroy. At best, his inclusion may show that Hasbro was interested in some of the ideas from Bionicle by hiring one of its writers, but given the numerous other projects Henry Gilroy worked on, it's more likely he was hired because he was just a great writer in the animation scene. But I will say that this investigation has given me solid evidence to show there is influence from Bionicle in Star Wars: The Clone Wars, so keep an eye out for that video coming soon. So, overall, the evidence I have is enough for me personally to delude myself into believing that the brother line may have taken at least some inspiration from Bionicle. Perhaps Hasbro saw the success Bionicle had with the concept and decided they could rework the Optimus Ultra Magnus story from Robots in Disguise to produce a similar effect as Matsunui and Makuta. But in the interest of integrity, I must say that I don't have enough evidence to conclude that with any confidence. So here's my official response to the question. Did Bionicle lead to Transformers 1? Small possibility, but probably not. So, why even have this discussion? Why publish this video? Well, a couple reasons. First, I did so much work and interest researching this that it feels like a waste to throw it away. Second, I think there is something to being honest when a theory I was hoping to be true didn't work out as I planned. I think it's good to show that a process of investigation might not give you the answers you want. Lord knows plenty of people on the internet just publish their theories because they want them to be true, not because they have actual proof. Not even just in media analysis, but like in general. Third, these theories aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. People draw inspiration from multiple sources all the time. Maybe that the writers of the 2007 movie saw how the word brother was being used in Bionicle, and realized they could use that in a Transformers movie, and inspire them to bringing back a concept that only appeared in a more obscure anime into mainline stories. And lastly, and this goes back to the true, honest motivation behind why I wanted to make a video like this in the first place, I wanted to start a conversation between Bionicle fans and Transformers fans. I'm heavily biased about this theory. I'm going to be honest about that. The reason I searched for evidence so hard was because I wanted it to be true so that I could give Transformers fans a reason to appreciate Bionicle. I can certainly say the reverse is true. While I've always liked Transformers, this deep dive into the various continuities has really given me a deeper appreciation of the world and characters that make Transformers beloved. One of the main motivations for my channel as a whole is a desire to get people talking about Bionicle again, hopefully even outside the original fanbase. Transformers is massively popular, more so than Bionicle ever was, and Transformers 1 was beloved in the TF fandom, despite underperforming in the box office. Transformers and Bionicle are both robot action figure stories whose stories go so much deeper and so much richer than they appear on the surface. Much like Orion Pax and D16 and all the Toa to each other, Transformers and Bionicle are brothers. We share the same spark, the same heart light. Unfortunately, Bionicle has been long canceled by LEGO, with at best a very small chance of it coming back one day. And although the Transformers franchise as a whole is still going pretty strong, Transformers 1 seems like it might not get a sequel, despite fans wanting one. But neither of us need official continuations to keep talking about and sharing these stories we love. I'd love for Bionicle fans and Transformers fans to bond over our love of these alien robots, who have so much more to them than meets the eye. Take care, my gathered friends.